be part of. An experiment on ESP, extrasensory perception. You all have cards. Take out those index cards and the pencils you were given. And I have something. I have a quarter. It's, well, you just have to take my word for it. It's a regular quarter, heads on one side, tails on the other. I'm going to use this quarter to generate a random message. And I'm going to try my best to transmit it out there to all of you. And you're going to try your best to receive it. Okay, the message is going to be 5 coin flips, 5 heads or tails. Now you just write down H for heads or T for tails. And just try your best to read my mind. Okay, you got it? There's going to be 5 flips, and I'm going to try my best to transmit it to the entire audience. Everyone ready? Okay, here's the first flip. Okay. Second flip. All right, number 3. Four. Okay, last one. Okay, very good. Now, some volunteers are going to come down both aisles, and we'd just like you to pass your card to the nearest aisle, and they'll collect them. You may be wondering whether you got it right or not. Hold that thought. Don't hold the card, but hold that thought, and we'll come back to it later in the show. All right? Please pass in your cards, and I will see you in a minute. Don't look this way. Don't look. You might be wondering what that was about and whether you got it right. So let's first see how many people got it right. If I remember right, the sequence that I flipped was heads, heads, tails, heads, tails. Now, do you guys remember? Look,
my God!
Can you raise your hand if you remember getting that right? Heads, heads, tails, heads, tails. Now, can you count that up? Is that?
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's
quite a lot.
Not quite a lot.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, well, double the size of the room, about 40. Now, I actually wrote down before, thinking, based on how many people they said were here, what's the p-value, the probability of getting a number that extreme by chance? And it actually goes off my chart. It would be less than 1 in 10,000, actually.
Okay. So
you could publish that result in any journal, and as we know, many people read about this in the Times and other places. There's all sorts of, or there's some recent research published in the most prominent social psychology journal by Daryl Bem on people's psychic abilities. Now, those are very subtle and interesting studies, and I'm not going to talk about them. But what's really going on here? Well, it could be that there's psychic transmission going on, or it could be that maybe you're just writing things down at random, and this is actually a replication, if you like, of an experiment that was originally done by the Zenith Radio Company in the 1930s, the golden age of radio, but also a golden age of interest in ESP. And they wanted to test the ability to send messages psychically across the country. And they had psychics in the studio, I believe here in New York. I'm not sure about that. Flipping coins or looking at these ESP cards. You might have seen pictures of them, wavy lines and crosses and so on, and sending out these sequences just like that, and then having listeners all around the country try to get the message and send in postcards reporting back the data. Now, the first slide is actually the data from those Zenith radio experiments done in the 1930s, and it's collapsed in a slightly interesting way, but I think you'll probably be able to get it. If you have these 5-bit sequences of binary 2 possibility outcomes, like heads, tails, or black, white, or here it's all written in terms of 0 and 1, what we're really interested in is your sense of coincidence and randomness in the sequence of the data. So we don't really care about the difference between heads, 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 and tails, 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 tails. What matters is that's a run of 5 things in a row. Similarly, we don't care about the difference between heads, 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 tails, and tails, 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 heads. So here the data has been collapsed across what we call parity, or replacing heads with tails and vice versa. And what you can see here is that some patterns were just much more likely to be written down than others. So for example, the one that I happen to flip tonight is this one, 00101. That would be heads, heads, tails, heads, tails, or tails, tails, heads, tails, heads. And the number of people who wrote that one in the 1930s is, well, maybe 100 times some of the other sequences. Again, if that just happened to be the lucky sequence, then it would provide extraordinary evidence for psychic powers. But we would now say, and psychologists have long understood this, as just tapping into the intuitive concept of randomness, saying not all patterns of a random process look equally good, equally like random. Now, it's interesting here, I think, that, what makes something look random or not? Well, a sign that I think there's really something quite fundamental about our brain's mechanisms for finding structure in the world is how replicable this experiment is across time and space. So the next slide shows a replication I did about 10 years ago at the Canada USA Math Camp, a camp for math whizzes in high school, who actually understand quite a lot about probability and lots of other things in math. But you do the same experiment and you get almost the very same data, except a bunch of them are smart Alex and wrote down 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Those are the true mathematicians. That's as likely as anything else.
But look at how striking the similarities are between high school kids in 2003 and whoever was listening to radio in the late 1930s. Now let's see the next one. I haven't actually seen the data yet.
So this is the data that, you see there are a lot of mathematicians in the house. Wow, excellent.
I have to say,
and a lot of psychics.
And a lot of psychics. Yeah, look how, what can I say? I'm impressed by this experiment, I have to say. It worked even better than I hoped it might. But it just shows that there is really something quite fundamental. Now nothing here tells you what that structure discovery is, what's fundamental. But we've actually built models that can predict these kinds of things, basically doing a kind of Bayesian reasoning in which what you're looking at is a comparison of the alternative hypotheses, just like you're saying. It's all about the different possible explanations. And we basically say, what are the different kinds of sequential, doing a kind of Bayesian reasoning, in which what you're looking at is a comparison of the alternative hypotheses, just like you're saying. It's all about the different possible explanations. And we basically say, what are the different kinds of sequential dependencies, things like runs or repetitions. And we say that our concept of randomness is, we're not interested, the brain isn't interested in just things that happen completely at random. What we're interested in is the structure, the non-random things. So our intuitive concept of randomness, which this is tapping into, is really just anti-structure. And we make a Bayesian model of structure perception, and that's able to predict these kinds of things quite well, actually.
So Leonard, we should come to your experiment that you also, which is about how...
One follow-up?
Yeah, go, yeah.
So who in the audience thinks that the heads is less likely than the one that actually was thrown?
You should
okay. And who thinks it was more likely? One, okay. Who thinks it was the same? All right, good. They're all the same. So every sequence has the equal probability.
If you're actually flipping a fair coin, right?
Well, if you're actually flipping a fair coin.
You see, the mind doesn't... The parts of the world that aren't predictable...
Wait a minute. I want to do some betting with you. Let's go.
Yeah, but Josh, did you actually... Was it exactly heads, heads, tails, or did you just say...
There's something magical about tonight, like the first birthday, because I would have said that no matter what, because I know how the data are going to look like. But in fact, I did actually flip that sequence, I swear.
Really? I'm not sure, Now, Leonard, I want to come to you, because we're getting near to the end of our time.
We'll go fast. But, I'm worried about the 0, 0, 0 with all you smart Alex, because I normally, so here's something about science that you learn about. Taking data is an art, and I didn't talk to whoever was tallying these numbers and emphasize to throw out the outliers.
Well,
so if any of you guys said 1,000 countries or 10,000 in Africa, this thing is totally screwed.
No.
I've had it when people put negative numbers.